Hello, everyone. This is Noah and John, and we are from UrbanDigs. This is Talking Manhattan. John, we got Ari Harkov here from Brown Harris Stevens. This guy's all the way at the top. This guy does so much deal volume. And today's episode is going to be one of those episodes where you're going to feel like a fly on the wall and one of the top producers of Manhattan real estate.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to it. This is Ari's been on before, and it's always it's all meat, no fat.
Yeah, it's good. It's a good food. It's good food for your brain. So Ari, with that, welcome to our show. Thanks for being on again.
Thanks for having me. I won't live up to any of that, but thank you.
You will. So let's start high level, Ari. Just tell us what's going on in the market. People want to know what's going on today. What are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. If you look at the arc of the pandemic, we had, March 22nd, our world shut down, 3 months exactly to June 22nd, where we weren't able to show in person. You had transaction volume that was 85% off of typical transaction volume during that period, which is like a two-sided coin. On the one hand, you could say you're removing 80+% of the Manhattan market, which is sort of shocking. On the other hand, pretty amazing that we did 15 to 20% of normal volume when we couldn't physically show property. Then the market reopened June 22nd. We had 2, 3, 4 months of really complete insanity. And when I say complete insanity, transaction volume didn't return to necessarily pre-COVID levels, but everything took like 3 or 4 hours to do 1 hour of normal pre-COVID work. So the work volume was pretty insane. We'll talk about kind of what segments of the market were most active, but it was very active overall. And now we're getting to the point where you're approaching the holidays. It's the winter. We're starting to see, COVID cases spiking. People are, talking about potentially a second shutdown. And I would say overall things have slowed down, but not as much as I necessarily would have thought. And then the other overarching theme, and it's this weird overlap. You've got like scary winter coming, but then you also have like maybe really positive spring, summer coming. And those two things are overlapping in an interesting way. So what I've been telling folks is I think the worst is behind us, but we're not yet on a rise, if that makes sense.
No, I think it's a great point. And that's one of the things that we've been talking about for the last several weeks is that it seems like momentum was really starting to build, coming into what's typically the end of the fall season right around Thanksgiving. And it looks like the week after Thanksgiving was pretty much the same as the week before Thanksgiving. And it seems like it might be a busier winter season than most people would anticipate. I'm wondering if you're seeing the same thing.
Yeah, I am seeing the same thing. I mean, it's interesting. We've actually had an uptick in activity in the last week or two on some of our listings, which is sort of shocking. We've had a couple listings where we had contracts out where buyers came in and made offers above contract prices while we had contracts out, which, is a mini anecdote, but it hasn't happened in a while. Mm-hmm. We've got some deals and projects on the new development side where we're doing deals right now at the lowest concession we've done thus far. So there are definitely some green shoots there. I don't want to mislead people. I don't want anyone thinking that prices are on the rise. I don't think they are. I think that the market has bottomed out. You guys say it a lot on your Friday pieces, and I'll say it here. The buyers that were looking to sort of bottom tick the market, I think have probably already missed the bottom.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. And I think the bottom was probably somewhere around June, July. You could probably even say May. But you know what? It's very important that you made a good distinction. We're talking about deal activity here. We're not talking about price action. So when we see deal activities coming way back, and we're kind of back to levels where it's like, oh my God, there's actually activity here, like an active season. We're not used to this. Prices probably have bottomed, stabilized, and started that turn back up to maybe where it would have been before all this. But it's still got a ways to go. So we are still down in terms of pricing.
Right. 100%.
Yeah, and I would just go farther. I think that's, it's very interesting because if you look at the deal activity during the pandemic, I mean, it went from, 100% early March down to, what you said earlier, like 10 to 15% of normal, which is just de minimis activity because of the lockdown. Now, here's the question I have for you, Ari, is if we do enter a second lockdown when real estate is shut down, what would you expect contract activity to do? Because I feel like my theory is that the fear level and the uncertainty level were sky high in March through June. Now, uncertainty still remains high, but fear has really dropped. And I think that's what's driving a lot of activity. So I'm just curious how you would see sort of a second shutdown hit deal activity.
So the way I think about our business, and probably a lot of businesses, is it's all about expectations. Right now, people have an expectation that it's going to be a miserable winter and then things are going to get better. So as long as it's not more miserable than we predict it to be in our minds, I think to your point, the fear won't spike in the way that it did in April, May, June.
Mhm.
So I think if we do enter a second shutdown, it will probably be more active than the first shutdown was, just based on the fact that it's sort of like we all know it's likely coming. And the flip side is we also all know there's probably a light at the end of the tunnel. And to go back to what we were talking about earlier, I think that you've got a number of buyers who are starting to feel like maybe I missed the bottom, or maybe it's not getting better, or any number of things that could happen that could make buying less attractive, such that I might be more motivated to buy in a theoretical January lockdown than I would have been in, let's say, the April lockdown.
Right. Yeah, it's such an interesting point, John, because I think I totally agree with that. I think we're going to get desensitized to it. It's not going to be that first shock, that initial uncertainty where we didn't know what the hell was going on. We're going to come out of it like we're not rookies anymore. We're kind of like mini experts now on this. We're veterans, of this whole thing, if that happens again.
Yep.
To say it in a weird way.
Yeah. And I think, Ari, you touched on something earlier, which I think is very germane, not only to the sales market, but especially the rentals market, which I think we were planning on getting to later, but I'm just going to go ahead and open up this can of worms now, which is that there's a sort of a dichotomy, I suppose, between short-term expectations of what the market's happening and sort of like long-term expectations. And short-term is everything's a bit of a mess. It's a bit jumpy. But when you start picturing, say, New York City of the future, like 5-7 years down the road, it's like, oh, okay. I understand that most likely the city will still exist. It will still be a fun place to be. We will have restaurants. There will be concerts and things like this. And I think this sort of dislocation between time horizons is more sort of acute in the rental market. But I'm curious if you're seeing this on what it looks like in the sales market to you, and also if you want to touch on the rentals market, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. You're dealing with different issues in the sales and rental market. Like, so one of the interesting things about the sales market is there's, to a certain extent, an ability to control inventory levels, meaning I'm an owner, I own a property, the market isn't where I want it to be, I'm not a forced seller, I may not put my property on the market. So I have an ability to make a decision. If I'm a landlord, I can't not rent my units. I have to rent the units. So I'm always a market taker to a certain extent. And so what you're seeing now in the rental market is this massive stockpiling of inventory, where you had more inventory that should have come on during peak season, less demand than we normally would have had. And now the inventory is continuing to pile as we now head into the worst rental time of year, traditionally speaking, in the winter. So the rental market is getting hammered, and it's really not pretty, whereas the sales market is actually holding up a little better. So it's funny, like at the beginning of the pandemic, there was almost this inverse of the rental market was doing better because people needed a place to live and they were scared to buy. And now the sales market seems to be doing better because, we've sort of hit the bottom, whereas the rental market slide is sadly, I think, still continuing.
Yeah, that's interesting. The rental market didn't really roll over until like June, July.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I wonder why. Let's delve into where those markets are. Let's talk about some deals and where they're happening. I'm getting excited here. Let's talk sales first. Tell me what you're seeing in terms of discounts. I'm a buyer out there. I think the market's down 15-20%. We keep telling people and showing them data that's not right. So tell us where your deals are happening.
So as we've always said, and you guys always say, there is no New York City market. There are thousands of submarkets. So the price point, the neighborhood, the building type, condo, co-op, walk-up, elevator, even block by block, it all varies. The big picture is Brooklyn, probably 5-ish%, maybe pushing 10, and Manhattan somewhere probably 10 to 20, depending on the property type. Sub 1 million condo in Manhattan, a desirable location, probably 5%. Upper East Side, 7-room co-op that needs a renovation could be 20%. So there's a range. But you've said it a lot, and I think it's very true. The buyers are thinking, oh my God, this is a pandemic, I should be getting 20% off. And the sellers are thinking, 5%, and some of them meet in the middle. And that's kind of what we've been seeing. I mean, it's weird to say this, but hasn't changed that much in terms of a discount level really since we reopened in July. It's been relatively flat. It's hovering a little bit, but it's been relatively flat.
Yeah. So, I mean, buyers, you didn't miss it in terms of price action. What you missed is those buyers that bid in April, May, and June, and they should deserve this. I think there was a higher frequency of gap down bids being hit by sellers that are fearful, as John was mentioning, or forced to liquidate for whatever reason. Whereas if we look today and we look at that same frequency of those types of situations, it's just way lower. And even then, it wasn't high. You know what I'm saying? It wasn't like every seller was hitting a bid. So as a distressed buyer, it was, it's happening here and there. I mean,
one way to sort of simplify what you're saying is to say, I think if you were going to transact because of COVID, meaning you're leaving the city, you're a forced seller, you've got financial issues, you're scared, whatever it is on the sell side, or you're going to transact because of COVID, meaning you see it's a buying opportunity, you've already done so. You've had 9 months to do your deal. At this point, the transactions we're doing are not COVID inspired. They're just transactions as they would always be in any market.
Right. Interesting. What about rentals? Give me a broad overview about where the rental market is in relation to before all this started.
So the rental market is, you've got a couple of things going on right now. So you've got the seasonal component, which we talked about a little bit, which is, we're heading into what is typically the slowest time of year. You've got less normal lease turnover. You've still got, some people who are moving out of the city or otherwise, deciding not to rent, COVID related or not. And you have essentially no inbound traffic. People are not moving to New York City right now in any sort of substantive numbers for new jobs, relocations, schooling, et cetera. So, the demand side is falling and the supply side is continuing to rise, which is not pretty. As is the case in the sales market, Brooklyn is faring better than Manhattan. Manhattan is bad. I'm not going to lie, it's bad. Brooklyn is anywhere from actually not so bad to okay, I would say. So, the Brooklyn deals tend to get done. The concessions are bigger. They're not what they were. The deals are not happening what they were at pre-COVID levels, but the deals are generally getting done. The traffic is okay, and we're transacting. The Manhattan market, there are rentals that are, when all said and done, 25, 30+% off of pre-COVID levels when you really factor in all the concessions. The numbers are huge.
Are you seeing those concessions fade at all, or are they still kind of?
No, I would actually say they're going up now.
Wow. So, we're still trying to find a bottom in that rental market.
Yes, because the rental market is being hit by this seasonal trend, which exists in any rental market. So it's a double whammy.
Right.
Yeah, and it's a great point, and that's, I think, goes back to sort of the whole time horizon thing. I think, as you mentioned, a lot of the landlords out there are market takers, so they have to basically make their monthly net, give it month in, month out. So they have to rent a certain number of apartments every month to kind of keep it afloat. But at the same time, I would imagine a lot are trying to hold on to some inventory to hopefully have sort of a brighter summer, late spring perhaps. So I'm sure they're in a bit of a bind. But if I could go back to, I think you made a great point about Brooklyn, and I'm just curious, when you look at the Brooklyn markets, you look at Manhattan. Brooklyn after the reopen just was like a match. It just took off on fire and it was going crazy. And I know you guys do a lot of business in both Brooklyn and Manhattan, and I'm wondering if you kind of compare and contrast those markets for us in terms of what buyers are looking for and what they sort of expect, because it seems like the trend from Brooklyn to Manhattan has been, it's not just a COVID thing. It's been sort of underway for the last several years. I'm wondering if you kind of touch on that a bit.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. I've been saying this for months like a broken record. I think that a lot of what COVID has done in many areas of our lives is take trends that were already there and highlight them, caricature them, bring them to the surface, whatever phrase you want to use. But to your point, Brooklyn was already doing a lot better pre-COVID. The upper end of the luxury condo market in Manhattan was already really bad pre-COVID. So a lot of what's happened here is you took trends like the retail landscape in Manhattan, and they were bad before, and now it's like a dumpster fire. But you've kind of highlighted the issues that were already there. So with Brooklyn versus Manhattan during the pandemic, you've got a couple things going on. One is Brooklyn is not reliant on tourism. It's not reliant on the second home market. It's not reliant on commuters. I live in Westchester, but I have to sleep in Manhattan 4 days a week because I'm in my cubicle till 11 p.m. It has none of that transience, and it has more of a communal neighborhood component to it. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is, because of that, as a causation and correlation, less people left Brooklyn, whereas more people left Manhattan. So when you look at like the population exodus from New York City, and I've said this before, there was no population exodus from New York City. It was a population exodus from Manhattan. And that's a very important distinction. Obviously, people left Brooklyn, but not nearly at the numbers that they left Manhattan. So what you have in Brooklyn is a combination of local people who have been buying, and then some folks who have left Manhattan but gone to Brooklyn to buy. And that has bolstered the market. Whereas Manhattan, people have left, but no one's coming in to buy in any sort of meaningful substantive numbers. So it's a very different market. And it's also interesting because if you were to break down Manhattan, as I know you guys like to do, if you look at the neighborhoody sections of Manhattan, the Upper West Sides, the Upper East Sides, the Village, etc., very different landscape than, let's say, if you were to look at like the Midtown condo market. So it tells you a little bit about what's happening. Like the people who live here, who make their homes here, are the ones who are buying. Every now and again, we get an out-of-towner, but they're just not buying anymore.
Yeah, and I was just gonna say, like the out-of-town, the foreign investors, all the businesses that are sending their people in. If you think about the market, it's all these tentacles of all these different kinds of workers and demographics and places and all that kind of stuff. If you break down where all the buyers are coming from, and it seems like Manhattan's got a lot of different tentacles, and the Brooklyn market's got tentacles, and Manhattan's just missing them. It's just they're all cut off right now, and there's just only 2 of 10 tentacles that are active. And what's going to happen is it's going to slowly come back over time, right? You're going to see a couple of tentacles come back here. You're going to see a couple of sectors get active here. You can see foreign investors coming back. You'll see businesses come back. It all will happen, and the market will slowly get back to normal. It's interesting, but I want to shift for a second because we got a lot of agents out there that are running into obstacles with deals. Okay, they're calling me. They're telling me they're running into obstacles. Are you seeing any obstacles when you're negotiating or in the contract phase, or challenges of any way? And if so, what are those biggest challenges so agents can try to get ahead of that?
Everything's a challenge. I mean, that's the thing about the pandemic. I mean, every deal is harder. Every deal is a heavier lift. I mean, I've hired and expanded on my team during COVID, not necessarily because our revenue has grown, but because the workload has just grown like threefold. So you've got administrative challenges. I mean, even just something as simple as like every time we want to show a property, filling out 3 forms and sending them back and forth or whatever, which sounds like really not that complicated. When you build that up over dozens and dozens of showings, is actually an administrative headache. And then in terms of deals, yeah, you've got banks changing guidelines, loan to value leverage issues, pre-sale requirements, et cetera. You've got the complicating elements of like, this building does Zoom interviews, this building does in-person interviews, this building you can read the board minutes online, that one you can't. This attorney is working on a deal, God forbid, his associate just got COVID, now he's not working right now. So there's just so many different complicating factors that we didn't have pre-COVID. But I would say the biggest issue by far and away is that there's no urgency on the part of buyers, and there has not been for months. There's no like, oh my God, if I don't buy this, prices are going up or inventory is falling off a cliff and I'm not going to have something. So you don't have that like power that kind of pushes you through deals as we've had for so many years and have gotten used to in New York City. You have to work a lot harder as a broker, which, fine, like that's part of our job. So yeah, but it's tough. And I think my biggest, my heart goes out for the newer agents because I think it's really hard to learn your craft during the market we're in right now. If you know your craft, executing becomes harder, but it's just a matter of like how many hours in a day are you willing to put in. If you don't know your craft, really hard to go from like 0 to 5 right now because like you can't network, you can't go out and meet people. It's really hard to learn.
Yeah, and you know what? This allows me a chance to actually say something on Talking Manhattan that I usually don't say. We say it on a weekly report. You got to be careful. This illiquid market, the unintended consequence of an illiquid period is that we have now 1/3 or 1/4 the amount of comps and sales and that types of data to use for pricing and for sales trends. And I got agents calling me every week saying, no, I'm looking at these charts, these price per square foot charts of these areas. They're all over the map. And I keep saying over and over again, you got to use caution when you're looking at those charts and that data gets really, really, really tight and low and there's nothing there, which leads me to my question, comps. Pricing property is extremely difficult. You used to have 10 things to look at, you got 2 now. So how do you handle that whole pricing conversation?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, so I priced out a property for a client last week and I did, which I've never done before, I used only in contract sales. And I used only in contract sales, not knowing the contract prices, but putting in a guesstimate based on time on market and just my gut intuition, because if I hadn't, I had nothing relevant to use for him. So I'm doing things like that. I'm doing things where I'm taking a sale from 2 or 3 years ago and I'm trying to adjust it for COVID. And by the way, as an aside, I want to say this because I think it's important to say, no one actually knows how much the market is down from a price perspective due to COVID. No one knows, because the only way to know would be to say this property would have traded for X, in February, and now it's trading for Y. But you don't know what it would have traded for. So we're all using like best guesses and estimates. And so, take the numbers, 5%, 10%, 15, whatever it is, with a grain of salt. But yeah, comps are really hard. It's really hard to run numbers right now. If you're lucky, you get a couple good ones. But, I was saying to this client last week, so phase 2 reopened in June. Even if a property went on the market, sold in July or August, and closed in like September, October, those are my first comps. And we're only in the beginning of December, so there aren't that many of them where I really truly know the closed price and I have them at scale. Right. So you've got to be creative is the answer.
That's great. And let me just ask you this, a very follow-up a little bit. The price cut conversation, I think this is a question that we often get sort of behind the scenes is, hey, when should I have a price cut, and how much should it be? And I'm just curious, has that sort of conversation changed in this new environment for you?
Has that conversation changed? I would say yes and no. No, it hasn't, in the sense that there's some basic tenets that I think still hold true. Price reductions that are sub 5%, meaning you make less than a 5% adjustment, in my mind, are always pointless. We always tell people if it's within 5%, someone's going to see it, they're going to bid on it, they're going to engage. So, going from, whatever it is, 1 million to 975 is useless, in my opinion. So there's certain basic tenets like that still hold true. The one thing that I think has shifted is that the buyer mindset of the first thing they ask when they walk through the door is, how long has this been on the market? And if it's more than like 5 minutes, they think something's wrong with it, has completely gone away. So the sense of like, okay, you've been on for 90 days, but I'll still put in a reasonably competitive bid, is very different now than it was pre-COVID. And so in that way, I feel less urgency to drop prices, because I think the buyer pool has sort of accepted a slower moving market overall. But beyond that, like, no one's inquired in 3 weeks, your price is wrong, like you got 3 bids and they were all 15% off your asking price, your price is wrong. Like, certain things are just clearly that they haven't changed.
Yeah. And just to end on that, John, really quick, we did that quick report the other day, John, where we looked at all of the closed deals that were signed into contract since the reopen, every single one. So we had a good batch of data to look at over the last 5-6 months. And what we noticed is, if you were lucky enough to close in under a month, your listing discount was only 2%. If you were 1 to 2 months, it was 5%. If you were 2 to 3 months, it was 7%. But if you were on the market for more than 3 months, it jumps right up to 13, 14, and 15% as you go higher.
Yep.
So for any sellers out there that are listening, when we say pricing right means everything, again, those people that priced right and sold quick, they got 98% of their asking price in today's market.
And I want to add to that, I think what you're saying is spot on. And I think it's a mix of causation and correlation, meaning you've been on the market longer, so people bid you lower because they feel they can. And also correlation in the sense that you overpriced, which causes you to be on the market longer. But it's both, which I think is important.
A lot of psychology. I love it. This is great. John, any final points?
Nope. That was a masterclass as far as I'm concerned. So bookmark this one.
We talked about
Thanks a lot. That is Ari Harkov of Brown Harris Stevens. That is John Walkup. I am Noah Rosenblatt. We are from UrbanDigs. This has been Talking Manhattan, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks for having me.